My ex-husband smirked as he walked out of the courtroom, convinced he had stripped me of every single asset I owned. He thought taking the house, the savings, and the car meant he had won the war. He believed he had left me with nothing but the clothes on my back and a mountain of debt. But he forgot about the invisible woman on the corner of 5th Street. He didn't know she had been watching him for decades, and he definitely didn't know she had just handed me the weapon that would end his life. If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. The box dug into my shoulder, a sharp corner pressing against the muscle in a way that guaranteed a bruise by morning. I adjusted my grip, shifting the weight, but it was useless. Gravity always won. The elevator in the complex was broken, of course. It was always broken in these kinds of buildings, the ones with peeling paint in the lobby and a vague smell of boiled cabbage that seemed to seep out of the drywall itself. I looked up the stairwell. 4th floor. I closed my eyes for a second and just breathed. I hated this job. I hated the brown uniform that was 2 sizes too big because the manager, a man named Rick, who smelled like stale coffee and desperation, said they were out of mediums. I hated the way people looked at me when I handed them their packages. They didn't see me. They saw a scanner, a signature pad, a mechanism for delivery. They looked through me like I was made of glass. 3 months ago, I was a school counselor. I wore blazers and sensible heels. I had a nameplate on my desk that said Gwendolyn Harper. I helped teenagers navigate college applications and breakups. Now, I was just the driver for Route 62. I started climbing the stairs. 1, 2, 3. My knees popped. I was 34 years old, but I felt 60. Every step was a reminder of how far I had fallen. I thought about the gas bill sitting on my kitchen counter. It was past due. I had done the math in my head 1,000 times since breakfast. If I paid the gas, I would have $12 left for food for the next 10 days. If I bought food, the heat would get cut off. It was November. The apartment was already drafty. I reached the 4th floor, gasping for air. I walked down the dim hallway to apartment 402. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. I heard movement inside, the heavy thud of footsteps. The door opened just a crack. A woman stared out at me, her eyes suspicious. She didn't say hello. She just extended a hand for the scanner. I held it out. She scribbled something that looked nothing like a name. I handed her the box. She took it and slammed the door in my face. The lock clicked shut with a definitive snap. I stood there for a moment in the silence of the hallway. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pound on her door and demand she look at me, really look at me, and acknowledge that I was a human being. But I didn't. I couldn't afford to lose this job. Rick was looking for any excuse to fire me. He had told me yesterday that I was too slow, that my metrics were lagging. I turned around and walked back to the stairs. My shift wasn't over. I had 40 more stops, 40 more flights of stairs, 40 more people who would look right through me. I swallowed the lump in my throat and kept moving. That was the only way to survive. You just kept moving. 5th Street and Maple Avenue was a chaotic intersection. Cars honked, buses hissed as they knelt to let passengers off, and pedestrians flowed like a river of gray coats and umbrellas. It was the kind of place where you had to be aggressive just to walk on the sidewalk. And right there, in the middle of the madness, sat Hattie. She was my anchor. I didn't know her real name back then. To me, she was just the woman in the oversized wool coat that had probably been gray once, but was now the color of street grime. She sat on a flattened cardboard box pressed against the brick wall of an old pharmacy. She never asked for money. She never held a sign. She just sat there, her knees pulled to her chest, watching the world rush by. I parked the delivery van in the loading zone around the corner. Technically, I wasn't supposed to stop here. It wasn't a drop-off point, but Rick wasn't watching the GPS that closely, or at least I hoped he wasn't. I grabbed the paper bag from the passenger seat. Inside was a turkey sandwich and a bottle of water. It was half my lunch. I walked around the corner and saw her. She was looking at the traffic light, her head tilted slightly to the side. When I approached, She didn't jump or flinch. She just turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto mine. They were striking eyes, a piercing, icy blue that seemed too young for her weathered face. I crouched down next to her. The pavement was cold and damp, seeping through my uniform trousers instantly. "Here," I said softly. I held out the bag. Hattie looked at the bag, then at me. She didn't smile. She never smiled. She just gave a single sharp nod, a gesture of acknowledgement that felt more like a queen dismissing a subject than a homeless woman accepting charity. She took the bag with hands that were wrapped in fingerless gloves. Her fingers were long and thin, the skin papery. "Thank you," she rasped. Her voice sounded like dry leaves scraping together. I wanted to ask her how she was doing. I wanted to ask if she had a place to sleep tonight because the forecast called for rain. But I knew the rules. We didn't talk about the hard stuff. We existed in this small bubble of silence where the world couldn't touch us. I lingered for a second. Being near her made me feel strangely calm. Maybe it was because she had hit rock bottom and was still breathing. If she could survive this street corner, maybe I could survive my empty apartment and the mountain of debt Travis had left me. I stood up, my knees cracking again. "Be safe, Hattie," I whispered. She didn't answer. She was already opening the bag, her movements precise and careful. I turned and walked back to the van. As I climbed into the driver's seat, I felt a heavy weight settle in my chest. I was one paycheck away from sitting on a piece of cardboard right next to her. The line between us was so thin it was practically transparent. I started the engine and merged back into traffic, terrified of how easy it would be to disappear completely. The radio in the van was stuck on a classic rock station. I couldn't change it because the knob had broken off years ago. As I drove toward the north side of the city, a song by Fleetwood Mac came on. It was Landslide. My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my knuckles turned white. That was the song that had been playing in the elevator at the courthouse. The memory hit me like a physical blow. I was back there, standing in the polished hallway, wearing the navy blue dress I had bought for my anniversary dinner 3 years ago. Travis was standing 10 feet away talking to his lawyer. His lawyer was a shark in a $3,000 suit, a man who smiled with too many teeth. I remembered the way Travis had looked at me. He didn't look angry. He didn't look sad. He looked bored. He checked his watch as if ending our marriage was just an appointment he needed to get through so he could make his tea time. I remembered the judge's voice, monotone and efficient. I remembered the words prenuptial agreement and commingled assets and failure to demonstrate contribution. I didn't understand half of the legal jargon. I just understood the bottom line. The house was his. The investments were his. The car was his. I remembered trying to speak up. I remembered my voice shaking. I tried to tell the judge that I had paid for the renovations. I had put every cent of my salary into that house, while Travis invested his money in his businesses. But I didn't have the receipts. I didn't have the paper trail. I had trusted my husband. Travis had walked over to me after the gavel came down. He put a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that looked comforting to anyone watching but felt like a brand. "Gwen, honey," he had said. His voice was smooth, dripping with that toxic benevolence he had perfected over 7 years. "This is really for the best. You were always so stressed about the bills. Now you don't have to worry about managing a big house. You can find something smaller, something more your speed. I'm doing you a favor, really." I wanted to scream. I wanted to claw his eyes out. But I just stood there, frozen, while he patted my shoulder and walked away. He walked away with my life in his pocket. The song on the radio ended. I blinked, realizing I had been staring at a red light for too long. A car behind me honked. I shook my head, trying to clear the image of Travis's smirk. He was gone. He was living in our house, sleeping in our bed, probably with some new girlfriend who didn't know yet that he was a monster wrapped in a polo shirt. I pressed the gas pedal. I couldn't think about him. Thinking about him was a luxury I couldn't afford. I had to finish my route. I had to get paid. It was Tuesday evening. The sun had already set, and the streetlights were flickering on, casting long orange shadows across the pavement. I was exhausted. My back throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. I had $8 in my pocket. That was it. Payday was Friday. I had to make $8 last 3 days. I parked the van in the usual spot. I grabbed a granola bar from my stash. It wasn't much, but it was something. I walked around the corner toward Hattie's spot. She was there, but something was wrong. Usually she was slumped against the wall, resting. Tonight she was sitting bolt upright. Her head was swiveling back and forth, scanning the street like a radar dish. Her body was tense, coiled tight. When she saw me, her eyes went wide. I approached her slowly. "Hattie?" I asked. "I have something for you." I reached out to hand her the granola bar. Hattie didn't take it. Instead, her hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. I gasped. Her grip was shocking. Her fingers were like iron claws, digging into my skin with a strength that shouldn't have been possible for a woman so frail. She yanked me down toward her. I stumbled, my knees hitting the concrete hard. She pulled my face close to hers. I could smell the stale scent of old clothes and the metallic tang of fear. Her eyes were darting around, looking over my shoulder, looking at the rooftops across the street. "Don't go home," she whispered. Her voice was different. It wasn't the raspy croak I was used to. It was sharp, urgent, terrified. I pulled back, trying to free my wrist, but she held on. "What? What are you talking about?" "Do not go home tonight," she hissed. Her nails dug deeper. "You cannot go back to that apartment, not tonight." My heart started to hammer against my ribs. "Hattie, you're hurting me. What's wrong? Are you sick? Do you need a doctor?" She shook her head violently. "No doctors. Listen to me, girl. I have been watching. I have seen the cars. I have seen the men. They know who you are. Who knows? You're scaring me." "The people who look for things," she said. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a second the madness seemed to clear, replaced by a cold, hard clarity that was even more frightening. "They are going to your place tonight. If you are there, they will hurt you." I stared at her. This was insane. This was paranoia. She was having an episode. She was a homeless woman living on a street corner. Of course her mind wasn't right. But then I looked at her hands. They weren't shaking. And I looked at her eyes. There was no confusion there, just fear, pure, unadulterated fear for me. "Stay at a hotel," she commanded. "Somewhere cash only, somewhere nobody knows. Don't use your cards. Don't call anyone. Just hide." She let go of my wrist as suddenly as she had grabbed it. She pushed me away. "Go, now!" I stood up, stumbling back. "Hattie, go!" she barked, turning her face away from me, pulling her coat up like a shield. I backed away. My wrist was throbbing where she had grabbed me. I looked around the street. It looked normal. Just people walking home, cars driving by. But suddenly, the shadows felt deeper. The alleyways felt darker. A chill that had nothing to do with the wind crawled up my spine. I stood on the corner of 5th and Maple for 5 minutes, frozen in a paralysis of indecision. The flow of the city moved around me. Someone bumped my shoulder and muttered a curse, but I didn't even turn to look. My mind was a battlefield. On one side was logic. Logic said Hattie was mentally ill. Logic said that hallucinations were common for people in her situation. Logic said I had $8 to my name and rent was due in a week. If I spent money on a hotel, I was putting myself in a hole I might never climb out of. A hotel room would cost at least $60 or $70. That was money for utilities. That was money for the credit card minimum payment. That was survival money. On the other side was instinct. Instinct was a quiet, nagging voice in the back of my lizard brain. It was the same voice that told you not to get in an elevator with a stranger or to cross the street when a certain car slowed down. Instinct said Hattie wasn't lying. Instinct remembered the strength in her grip and the clarity in her eyes. I pulled out my phone. The screen was cracked. I looked at my bank app. Balance, $42.15. If I booked a room, I would overdraft. The bank would hit me with a $35 fee. I would be nearly $100 in the hole. I looked down the street toward the bus stop that would take me home. It was so easy. Just get on the bus, go home, lock the door, eat some ramen, go to sleep. Forget the crazy lady on the corner. But I couldn't move my feet in that direction. The image of Hattie's eyes kept flashing in my mind. They will hurt you. Why would she say that? She had never said anything like that before. For 3 months, our interactions had been nothing but polite nods and gratitude. Why break the pattern now? Why risk scaring away her only source of consistent food unless she truly believed it? I thought about my apartment. It was on the ground floor. The window in the bedroom didn't lock properly. The front door was hollow wood. If someone wanted to get in, they could. I took a breath. The air tasted like exhaust and rain. I couldn't go home. I didn't know why, and I couldn't justify it with facts, but my body refused to take a single step toward that bus stop. The fear had taken root, and it was spreading. I turned around and started walking in the opposite direction, toward the seedier part of downtown, where the motels didn't ask for ID and didn't care who you were as long as you had cash. The Red Carpet Inn did not have a red carpet. It had linoleum that was curling up at the edges and a bulletproof glass partition at the front desk. The lobby smelled of stale cigarette smoke and bleach, a combination that made my stomach turn. I walked up to the window. The man behind the glass didn't look up from his phone. He was wearing a stained tank top and chewing on a toothpick. "How much for a night?" I asked. My voice sounded small in the empty room. He glanced at me, his eyes flicking over my uniform. 60. Cash. I swallowed. 60. I had $8 in my pocket. I had to use the debit card. I had to overdraft. I had to ruin my finances for a feeling. "Can I use a card?" He sighed, rolling his eyes like I had asked him to solve a calculus problem. $5 extra for card. $65. Plus the overdraft fee. This night was going to cost me $100. $100 was 2 weeks of groceries. It was a quarter of my car insurance. I hesitated. My hand hovered over my wallet. This was stupid. This was so incredibly stupid. I should just turn around and leave. But then I felt the ghost of Hattie's fingers on my wrist. "They know who you are." "Fine," I said. I pulled out the card. He swiped it. The machine beeped. I signed the receipt, my hand shaking slightly. He slid a key across the metal tray under the glass. Room 104, down the hall to the left. No guests after 10, no smoking. I took the key. It was attached to a large diamond-shaped piece of green plastic. I walked down the hallway. The carpet was patterned with swirls of brown and orange, presumably to hide stains. I found room 104 and unlocked the door. The room was tiny. There was a double bed with a polyester spread that had cigarette burns in it. There was a small TV bolted to the dresser. The window looked out onto a brick wall. I walked in and locked the door behind me. I threw the deadbolt. Then I dragged the single wooden chair from the corner and wedged it under the doorknob. I sat down on the edge of the bed. The springs creaked loudly. I didn't take off my shoes. I didn't take off my uniform. I just sat there, staring at the blank screen of the television, listening to the sounds of the motel. Someone was shouting in the room next door. A siren wailed in the distance. I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls. I felt like an idiot. I was sitting in a roach motel, broke and exhausted, hiding from imaginary monsters because a homeless woman told me to. Travis would laugh if he could see me. He would tell me I was being dramatic, hysterical. But as the night wore on and the shadows in the room deepened, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just made the most important purchase of my life. The red neon sign outside the motel window buzzed with a sound like an angry hornet, flashing on and off in a rhythm that made sleep impossible. I lay on the lumpy mattress, staring at the ceiling where a water stain shaped like a grimacing face looked back at me. It was 2 a.m. I had been in this room for 6 hours, and every single minute had been a torture session of self-doubt. I rolled over, the springs shrieking beneath me. My phone sat on the nightstand, a black rectangle of silence. I picked it up for the 100th time. The battery was at 12%. I didn't have a charger. I had left it in the van. If the phone died, I was cut off from the world. I tapped the screen. No notifications. God, I was stupid. I sat up, wrapping the thin, scratchy blanket around my shoulders. I was sitting in a drug den motel, draining my bank account because a woman who talked to pigeons had grabbed my wrist. Travis was right about me. He always said I was too emotional, too easily led. He used to tell me that I needed him to be the rational one, the anchor. Now that he was gone, I was drifting into insanity. I calculated the cost again. $65 for the room. That meant I couldn't buy gas for the van tomorrow. If I couldn't buy gas, I couldn't work. If I couldn't work, I got fired. Hattie hadn't saved me. She had just helped me destroy my life a little faster. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the flashing red light. I decided I would leave at first light. I would go home, shower, pretend this never happened, and beg Rick for an advance on my paycheck. It was a humiliating plan, but it was the only one I had. Then the phone buzzed against the nightstand. The sound was like a gunshot in the small room. I jumped, my heart slamming into my throat. I grabbed the phone, my fingers fumbling. The screen was blindingly bright in the darkness. It was a text message. The number was stored in my phone as neighbor Mrs. Gable. She lived in 401, directly across the hall. We barely spoke. Just polite nods when we were both taking out the trash. Why would she be texting me at 2:30 in the morning? I opened the message. The text was short and terrified. She asked if I was okay because there were police everywhere. She said she had heard a crash. My blood ran cold. The phone shook in my hand. I stared at the words, reading them over and over until they blurred. Police. Crash. I didn't reply by text. I hit the call button. Mrs. Gable answered on the first ring. Her voice was a whisper, trembling and high-pitched. "Gwen? Oh, thank God. Where are you?" I'm not home," I stammered. My throat felt tight, like someone was choking me. "What's happening? You need to come back, or maybe you shouldn't. I don't know." She sounded like she was crying. "About an hour ago, I heard this terrible noise, like wood splintering. I looked out my peephole. There were men, Gwen, 3 of them. They were in your apartment, 3 men. I gripped the phone so hard the plastic case creaked. Did they take anything? I don't know. They were in there for a long time. They were tearing things apart. I could hear glass breaking. I called 911, but by the time the police got here, the men were gone. The police are still here. They're knocking on doors. They think maybe you're inside, maybe you're hurt." I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. If I had been there, if I had been sleeping in my bed like a normal person. "Tell them I'm safe," I whispered. My voice sounded foreign, like it belonged to someone else. "Tell the officers I'm staying with a friend. I'll be there in the morning. Are you sure? Do you want me to put one of them on the phone?" No, I can't talk to them right now. Just tell them I'm not dead." I hung up before she could ask any more questions. I dropped the phone onto the bedspread. Hattie was right. The realization washed over me, cold and absolute. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't mental illness. It was a warning, a specific, accurate warning. I looked around the dirty motel room, the peeling wallpaper, the cigarette burns, the water stain on the ceiling. 5 minutes ago, this place had felt like a prison of my own stupidity. Now, it looked like a fortress. It was the only reason I was still breathing. I pulled my knees to my chest and rocked back and forth. Who were these men? Why me? I was a delivery driver with $40 in the bank. I was nobody. But Hattie knew. She knew they were coming, which meant Hattie knew who they were. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat by the window, peeking through the crack in the curtains, watching the parking lot, waiting for a black car to pull in. waiting for the monsters to find me. The morning sun was gray and weak, filtering through the smog of the city. I checked out of the motel at 6 in the morning without asking for a receipt. I drove the van to my apartment building, my hands slick with sweat on the steering wheel. A police cruiser was still parked out front, its lights off. I parked the van down the block and walked up. My legs felt heavy, like I was wading through mud. I walked up the 4 flights of stairs. The hallway smelled of drywall dust and something sharp, like ozone. Mrs. Gable was standing in her doorway, clutching a robe around her chest. When she saw me, she covered her mouth. Gwen. Oh, honey. I walked past her to apartment 402. The door was hanging off its hinges. The wood around the lock was shattered, splinters sticking out like jagged teeth. There was yellow police tape draped across the frame, but it had already been torn, probably by the officers leaving. I stepped inside. My apartment was gone. In its place was a chaotic sea of debris. Every drawer had been pulled out and dumped on the floor. My clothes were scattered everywhere, trampled by heavy boots. The small television was smashed, face down on the carpet. The sofa cushions had been sliced open, white stuffing erupting from them like guts. But it was the bedroom that stopped my heart. I stood in the doorway, gripping the frame for support. My mattress had been flipped over. It was slashed. Long, vicious cuts ran down the length of the fabric. The stuffing was torn out in violent clumps. They hadn't just been looking for something. They had been angry. They had attacked the bed where they thought I was sleeping. A police officer stepped out of the bathroom. He was young, holding a clipboard. He looked bored. "Ma'am, you can't be in here. This is a crime scene." "I live here," I said. My voice was hollow. "I'm Gwendolyn Harper." He lowered the clipboard. "Oh, we've been looking for you. Your neighbors said you were with a friend." I nodded numbly. "What happened?" "Looks like a break-in," he said, shrugging. "But it's weird. They didn't take the TV, didn't take the laptop we found under the pile of clothes. Looks like they were searching for cash or drugs. You have any enemies, Miss Harper? Ex-boyfriend with a temper? Owe money to a loan shark?" I stared at the slashed mattress. "No," I said. "I don't have any enemies." He scribbled something down. "Well, file a report if you find anything specific missing. Otherwise, get your landlord to fix the door. Not much we can do. No prints, no witnesses who saw faces." He walked past me, his radio crackling. He didn't care. To him, this was just paperwork. He didn't see the violence in the slashed fabric. He didn't see that this wasn't a robbery, it was an execution that missed its target. I waited until he was down the hall. Then I turned and ran. I ran down the stairs, ignoring the pain in my back. I had to get to 5th and Maple. I had to find the only person who actually saw me. The city was waking up. Delivery trucks rumbled, commuters walked with their heads down, coffee in hand. I parked the van illegally again. I didn't care about tickets. I didn't care about Rick. I ran to the corner. Hattie was there. She was sitting on her cardboard, just like always. But as I got closer, I saw the change. Yesterday, she had been a pile of rags and misery. Today, her spine was straight. Her head was up. Her hands were resting on her knees, not clenched in fear, but poised. I slowed down as I approached her. I was out of breath, my chest heaving. "You were right," I gasped. I dropped to my knees on the sidewalk, not caring about the grime. They destroyed it. My apartment. They cut up my mattress. Hattie looked at me. Her blue eyes were clear, sharp as cut glass. There was no trace of the confused old woman I had fed for 3 months. "I know," she said. Her voice was steady, the rasp gone. They were looking for the connection. "What connection?" I whispered. "Who are they? Who are you?" She glanced up at the street camera mounted on the traffic light above us. Then she looked back at me. "Not here," she said. "Stand up, Gwendolyn. Walk with me." She stood up. Her movement was fluid, surprisingly strong. She didn't groan or hold her back. She picked up a plastic bag that I had assumed held trash, but she handled it with care. She started walking north, away from the busy intersection. I scrambled to my feet and followed her. I felt like Alice falling down the rabbit hole, except this wasn't Wonderland. It was a nightmare, and Hattie was the only guide I had. We walked for 10 minutes in silence. Hattie led me to a small, neglected park sandwiched between two warehouses. The grass was overgrown, and the benches were rusted, but it was empty. She sat down on the bench furthest from the street. I sat next to her, leaving a foot of space between us. I looked at her profile. The grime on her face looked almost like camouflage now, deliberate. "Talk to me," I said. "Please. I'm terrified." "My name is not Hattie," she said. She didn't look at me. She watched a squirrel darting across the grass. "My name is Harriet Coleman. 30 years ago, I was the lead forensic accountant for Redwood Shipping." Redwood Shipping? The name sounded vaguely familiar, like something from a history book or an old news report. "It was a logistics company," she continued. "Massive. We moved cargo all over the eastern seaboard. On paper, we moved furniture, electronics, textiles. In reality, we moved everything the cartels and the syndicates didn't want the government to see. Guns, drugs, people." I stared at her. "You were part of that?" "I balanced the books," she said. Her tone was clinical. "I made the illegal look legal. I created shell companies, buried transactions, washed the money until it was clean enough to spend. I was good at it. I was very good at it." "So you're a criminal," I said. My sympathy was evaporating, replaced by a cold knot of betrayal. "I was," she agreed, "until I saw what they did to the people who got in their way. I saw things, Gwendolyn, things that made the money worthless. So I turned. I went to the FBI. I became the star witness in the biggest RICO case of the 90s. I remembered now. I was a child then, but I remembered the news. The Redwood trials. It was on TV every night. You testified," I said. "I put 12 men in federal prison for life," she said. "But I didn't get them all. The man at the top, the architect, he slipped away. And the organization, it didn't die. It just hibernated. It reorganized. And now they are cleaning up loose ends. They have been hunting me for 3 decades. I have stayed alive by being invisible, by becoming the one thing nobody looks at twice. A homeless woman." I looked at her torn coat, her fingerless gloves. 30 years, I whispered. "You've been living like this for 30 years? "It keeps me safe," she said. "Or it did, until you started being nice to me." The guilt hit me hard. "I did this?" "They watch me," she said. "They always have watchers. Usually, people ignore me. But you stopped. Every day. Same time. You brought food. You looked me in the eye. To them, that looked like a contact. It looked like a handover. They think you gave me something," I realized. "That's why they tore apart my apartment. They were looking for—" "What?" "Evidence," she said. "The insurance policy I kept. The evidence that proves who runs the new syndicate." I sat back against the rusted metal of the bench. My head was spinning. This was a movie. This wasn't my life. I was a counselor. I was a delivery driver. I wasn't a player in a mob war. "So they searched my place and found nothing," I said, trying to find a thread of hope. "So now they know I'm innocent. They'll leave me alone, right?" Hattie turned to me. Her expression was pitying. "No, they don't work like that. If they think you might know something, you are a liability. And they had help, Gwendolyn. That's the part you need to understand. They didn't just pick your lock. They had a key." I frowned. "No, they kicked the door in. The lock was shattered." "The deadbolt was shattered," she corrected. "But the bottom lock? The handle? They opened that with a key. I saw the report from my contact." I shook my head. "Only 2 people have a key. Me and the landlord." "And your husband," she said softly. "My ex-husband," I corrected automatically. "But I took his key. When he moved out, I took it back." "Did you change the locks?" she asked. No, I I couldn't afford it. But I have the key. It's in a bowl in the kitchen. Hattie leaned in closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Travis didn't just leave you, Gwendolyn. He was recruited. What? Travis works for a firm called Miller and Associates, doesn't he? Yes, I said. He's a consultant. He helps businesses restructure. He's a fixer, she said, blunt as a hammer. He helps companies hide assets. He helps them launder money. He's a low-level associate for the same people I ran from. Why do you think he took everything in the divorce? Why do you think he was so ruthless? It wasn't just greed, it was a test. He had to prove he could be cold. He had to prove he had no attachments. I felt like the ground was dissolving under my feet. Travis? The man who cried when we watched Marley and Me? The man who used to make me pancakes on Sundays? He gave them the key, Hattie said. He told them you were weak. He told them you were easily frightened. He told them that if they tossed your apartment, you would run. And he was right. Rage. It started in my stomach, a hot, burning coal. It spread to my chest, my throat, my hands. For months, I had been drowning in sadness. I had been mourning the loss of my marriage, feeling like a failure, feeling like I wasn't enough. But it was a lie. All of it. He hadn't just fallen out of love. He had sold me out. He had fed me to the wolves to get a promotion. I looked at Hattie. The fear in my chest was still there, but it was being crowded out by something sharper. Where is it? I asked. Where is what? The evidence. The thing they think I have. Hattie smiled. A small, dangerous thing. It's safe, but I can't move it. If I leave my corner, if I go to the hiding spot, they will swoop in. I am the decoy, Gwendolyn. I have to stay on the corner and let them watch me. Then who moves it? I asked, though I already knew the answer. You do, she said. You're the delivery driver. You go everywhere. Nobody looks at the delivery girl. I looked at my hands. They were shaking, but not from cold. I thought about the slashed mattress. I thought about Travis's smirk in the courtroom. I thought about the way he patted my shoulder and told me he was doing me a favor. He wanted me to be weak. He banked on it. Tell me what to do, I said. The wind cut through the park, rattling the chain-link fence behind us. I looked at Harriet, really looked at her. Beneath the layers of grime and the shapeless coat, I could see the woman she used to be. I saw the intelligence that had unbalanced a criminal empire, and I saw the exhaustion of holding that weight alone for 30 years. You want me to go where? I asked, my voice barely louder than the rustling leaves. St. Jude's, she said. It's an old church on the east side, near the shipyard. It's been condemned for a decade. The city keeps threatening to tear it down, but the Historical Society keeps filing injunctions. It's in legal limbo. That makes it perfect. I knew the place. It was a rotting husk of gray stone and boarded-up windows. I had driven past it 100 times on Route 12. And the evidence is there? In the sacristy, she said, under the floorboards. I looked at my hands. They were red from the cold. I was a delivery driver. I delivered toothpaste and dog food. I didn't raid abandoned churches for mob evidence. But then I thought about Travis. I thought about the way he had looked at me across the courtroom table, his face a mask of polite pity, while he systematically erased my future. He had called me fragile. He had told his new friends I would break. I'm not fragile, I thought. The anger was a solid thing in my chest now, heavy and hot. Okay, I said. I'll get it. Harriet reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out a key. It was an old iron skeleton key, heavy and rusted, the kind that belonged in a museum. Side door, she instructed. It looks locked, but the frame is loose. You have to lift the door while you turn the key. Once you're inside, go to the altar. Behind it is a small room where the priest used to robe. In the corner, under the window, there is a loose board. And then what? I asked, taking the key. The metal was cold against my palm. Then you take it to William Bennett, she said. He is the only one who can use it. He was the agent who handled me back then. He's retired now, lives in the suburbs. I wrote his address on the back of a receipt in the bag I gave you yesterday. I nodded. I could do this. It was just a delivery. A high-stakes, terrifying delivery. I stood up. My knees popped. What about you? I go back to the corner, she said, remaining on the bench. I have to be seen. If I disappear, they will start looking for me. If I am there, they will watch me. And while they are watching me, they won't be watching you. I didn't want to leave her. She looked so small on that bench, a target painted in gray wool. But I knew she was right. I turned and walked away, clutching the iron key in my pocket like a talisman. I hurried back to where I had parked the van. The meter was flashing red, indicating the time had expired an hour ago, but there was no ticket on the windshield. Small mercies. I climbed into the driver's seat and jammed the key into the ignition. I turned it. The engine made a sound like a dying cat, a high-pitched whine followed by a wet, grinding click. Then silence. No, I whispered. I hit the steering wheel with the heel of my hand. No, 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 not now. I tried again. The engine didn't even whine this time. The dashboard lights flickered and died. The battery was dead. Or maybe the starter. It didn't matter. The van was a 2-ton brick. I sat there, staring through the dirty windshield. Panic started to rise in my throat, tasting like bile. I couldn't call a tow truck. I didn't have the money, and I didn't have the time. And I couldn't sit here. A stalled delivery van in a loading zone would attract attention. A police officer might stop to help. They would run my license. They would see the report about the break-in. They might ask questions I couldn't answer. I had to move. I grabbed my backpack from the passenger seat. It was the company-issued bag, black with a reflective stripe. I shoved the iron key deep into the front pocket. I got out of the van and locked it, leaving it there as a monument to my bad luck. I looked up the street. The bus stop was 2 blocks away. Route 14 went to the east side. It would get me close to the church. I started walking. I felt exposed. Without the metal shell of the van around me, I felt like everyone could see the guilt written on my face. A man in a suit walked past me and glanced at my uniform. I flinched. A car slowed down to turn the corner, and my heart hammered against my ribs until I saw it was just a mother with 2 kids in the back. This was what Harriet lived with every day, the constant gnawing feeling of being hunted. I reached the bus stop. There were 3 other people waiting. A teenager with headphones, an elderly woman with a cart full of groceries, and a man reading a newspaper. I stood apart from them, keeping my head down. The bus arrived with a screech of air brakes. I climbed on, the coin machine swallowing the last of my loose change. I moved to the back, finding a seat near the window. As the bus lurched forward, I watched the city roll by. Every black sedan looked suspicious. Every person on a phone looked like they were calling in my position. Travis had called me paranoid once when I double-checked the locks at night. I wondered what he would call this. The east side was a graveyard of industry. We passed empty factories with broken windows that looked like jagged teeth. We passed chain-link fences guarding vacant lots filled with weeds and rusted machinery. I got off the bus 3 blocks from the church. The air here smelled of brine and diesel from the nearby shipyard. The streets were empty. St. Jude's rose up from the concrete like a fortress. It was built of dark gray stone that had been stained black by decades of city soot. The windows were covered with plywood that had grayed with age. The front doors were chained shut, a sign declaring the structure condemned and dangerous, nailed into the wood. I walked around the perimeter, my boots crunching on broken glass. I felt like a trespasser. I felt like a grave robber. I found the side door Harriet had described. It was a heavy wooden door, tucked away in the shadow of a flying buttress. It looked solid, immovable. I looked around. The street was empty. A seagull cried out overhead, the sound lonely and sharp. I took the iron key from my pocket. My hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I forced myself to take a deep breath. In, out, focus. I slid the key into the lock. It went in stiffly, grinding against rust. I gripped the handle with my other hand and lifted, just as Harriet had said. I turned the key. There was a heavy clack, the sound of a tumbler falling into place. I pushed. The door groaned, the wood swelling against the frame, but it opened. A smell rushed out to meet me. It was the smell of old paper, damp stone, and incense that had burned out years ago. It was the smell of silence. I slipped inside and pulled the door shut behind me. The darkness was immediate and total. I didn't have a flashlight. I pulled out my phone and turned on the torch. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like microscopic ghosts. I was in a hallway. To my left was the main sanctuary. I shined the light that way. Rows of empty pews stretched out into the darkness. The altar was stripped bare, just a slab of stone. The crucifix was gone, leaving a pale outline on the wall where it had hung for decades. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. I turned right, heading toward the back. My footsteps echoed on the stone floor, sounding like gunshots in the quiet. I reached the room behind the altar, the sacristy. It was small, with built-in cabinets that hung open, empty. A broken chair lay on its side. I went to the corner under the window. The window was boarded up, but a sliver of daylight managed to slice through a crack in the plywood, illuminating the floor. I knelt down. The dust was thick here, a gray carpet that coated everything. I brushed it away with my gloved hand. The floorboards were wide, dark oak. I ran my fingers along the seams. One board, about 3 feet long, felt slightly different. The gap between it and the next board was a fraction of an inch wider. I dug my fingertips into the gap. I pulled. It didn't move. I grunted, putting my back into it. My fingernail bent back painfully inside the glove. "Come on," I hissed. I looked around for a tool. I saw a piece of rusted pipe in the corner. I grabbed it and wedged it into the crack. I leveraged it down. With a shriek of old nails giving way, the board popped up. I pushed it aside. Underneath, resting in the space between the joists, was a metal lockbox. It was gray, the kind you buy at an office supply store for petty cash. It looked impossibly mundane. I reached down and lifted it out. It was heavy, heavier than paper should be. The box wasn't locked. Harriet hadn't bothered with a key for the box itself. She relied on the church to be the vault. I sat back on my heels and opened the lid. Inside, there was no money. There were no jewels. There was just paper and plastic. I picked up the first item. It was a thick ledger, bound in black leather. I opened it. The pages were filled with Harriet's handwriting, precise, slanted, cramped. Columns of numbers marched down the page. I traced a line with my finger. It wasn't just numbers. It was a narrative of corruption. One column listed a shipping container number. The next listed a declared content of agricultural equipment. The third column, written in red ink, read small arms. The final column listed a payout amount that made my stomach turn, $700,000. I flipped the page. There was a photograph clipped to the paper. It was grainy, taken from a distance with a zoom lens. It showed 2 men shaking hands on a dock. One man I didn't recognize. The other man I had seen on the news just last week. He was a city councilman. He was smiling. I dug deeper into the box. There were cassette tapes, the old plastic kind. There were USB drives, sleek and modern, showing that Harriet had kept updating this archive long after she left Redwood. Then I found the blue folder at the bottom. I opened it. This wasn't shipping manifests. These were personnel files. I saw photos of men in suits, men in police uniforms, men in judges' robes, and under each photo was a list of dates and dollar amounts. I stopped at a page near the back. The name at the top was not Travis. It was Miller. The man who owned the consulting firm where Travis worked. I read the note Harriet had scrawled in the margin. Launderer for the Eastern Bloc, specialized in real estate and divorce assets. My breath hitched. Divorce assets. Travis hadn't just used Miller's lawyers to beat me. Travis was funneling our assets, my house, my savings, directly into the wash cycle of a crime syndicate. I slammed the folder shut. My hands were shaking violently now. This wasn't just evidence of a crime. This was the blueprint of a cancer that had eaten the city from the inside out, and I was holding the scalpel. I needed to move. Every second I sat here in the dust was a second the men in the black cars could be closing in on Harriet. I grabbed my backpack. I emptied out my personal things, my water bottle, my extra sweater, my lunch wrapper. I stuffed them into the corner of the room. I needed the space. I started transferring the contents of the lockbox into my backpack. The ledgers went in first, creating a hard, flat layer against my spine. Then the folders. Then the tapes and drives, which I shoved into the zippered pockets meant for pens and receipts. The bag was heavy now, a solid weight that pulled at my shoulders. I reached into the bottom of the metal box to make sure I had everything. My fingers brushed against a white envelope taped to the metal floor. I pulled it loose. On the front, in Harriet's shaky handwriting, was a name, William Bennett. It was unsealed. I knew I shouldn't look, but I couldn't help it. I lifted the flap and pulled out the single sheet of lined paper. I didn't read the whole thing. I just scanned the first paragraph. William, if you are reading this, I am likely dead. The person delivering this package is innocent. She knows nothing of the life we led. Protect her. She is the only reason this truth survived. I shoved the letter back into the envelope and tucked it into the front pocket of the backpack, right next to the iron key. She had written a eulogy for herself. She had planned for this. She had walked into the line of fire knowing she probably wouldn't walk out, just so I could get this bag to a man in the suburbs. I zipped the bag shut. The sound was loud in the small room. I stood up and slung the pack over one shoulder. It hit my bruise, but I didn't care. The pain was grounding. I put the floorboard back in place. I kicked dust over it, trying to hide the disturbance. It wasn't perfect, but it would hold up to a casual glance. I turned off my phone light to save the battery. The darkness rushed back in, heavy and suffocating. I navigated the hallway by memory, feeling the stone wall with my left hand. I reached the side door. I pressed my ear against the wood. I listened. Silence. Just the wind and the distant cry of the gull. I opened the door and stepped out into the gray light of the afternoon. The city looked the same as it had 10 minutes ago, but it felt different. The buildings looked like stage sets concealing rot. The people walking in the distance looked like potential threats. I adjusted the straps of the backpack. I had the weapon. Now I just had to deliver it. I stepped away from the heavy wooden door of St. Jude's, and the sound of the latch clicking into place felt like the final period at the end of a sentence. The church was a tomb now, empty of its secrets. I was the vessel. I walked down the cracked sidewalk, the backpack thumping rhythmically against my spine. It was heavy, a solid 30 pounds of paper and plastic, but the real weight was the knowledge inside. I was carrying the reason families were destroyed. I was carrying the reason men died in warehouses. I was carrying the proof that my own divorce wasn't a failed marriage, but a financial transaction for a crime syndicate. I made it to the corner and checked my phone. The battery was in the red, hovering at 9%. I had enough charge to look up the route to William Bennett's house in the suburbs, but not enough to call for help if I got lost. I needed to catch the number 14 bus back to the transit center, then switch to the commuter line. I stood at the bus stop, surrounded by the gray skeletons of industry. The wind off the shipyard was bitter, smelling of salt and rust. I pulled my collar up. For the first time in days, I felt a strange, cold clarity. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was fighting back. I had the weapon Harriet had promised me. I imagined the look on William Bennett's face when I handed him the bag. I imagined the federal agents swarming Miller and associates. I imagined Travis being led out of his corner office in handcuffs, his perfect suit wrinkled, his smirk wiped clean. It was a good thought. It was a hopeful thought. It made me stand a little straighter as the bus hissed to a stop in front of me. The bus was nearly empty. I took a seat near the back, hugging the backpack to my chest like a child holding a teddy bear. I didn't put it on the floor. I didn't let go of the straps. We rattled through the industrial district, the engine groaning with every gear shift. I watched the world slide by through the dirty window. We passed a salvage yard, a diner with a flickering sign, a row of boarded-up houses. Then I saw it. At first, it was just a shape in the reflection of the bus window. A black sedan, keeping pace 2 lanes over. It had tinted windows, dark as oil. I turned my head slightly, trying to look casual. The car was a generic model, the kind that disappeared in a parking lot. It stayed perfectly parallel with the bus's rear bumper. The bus slowed down for a red light. The car slowed down. The bus accelerated. The car accelerated. My stomach dropped. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid. Harriet had said they would be watching her, not me. That was the plan. I was the invisible delivery driver. But then the bus turned right, heading toward the city center. The black sedan turned right. It didn't signal. It just drifted into the turn with a predatory smoothness. They weren't watching Harriet. Or maybe they were, and they had seen me leave the park. Or maybe Travis knew me better than I thought. Maybe he knew exactly where I would go if I felt cornered. I looked around the bus. The driver was indifferent. A woman 2 rows up was asleep. I was alone. I pressed the stop request button. The bell chimed. I stood up, slinging the heavy bag over both shoulders. I couldn't lead them to the transit center. I couldn't be trapped in a metal tube on the highway. I had to lose them in the streets. The bus pulled over. I stumbled down the steps and hit the pavement running. I was in the warehouse district now, a maze of brick alleys and loading docks. I didn't look back. I just ran. My boots slapped against the wet asphalt. The backpack bounced violently, the straps digging into my bruises. I turned the first corner I saw, sprinting down a narrow alley filled with overflowing dumpsters. I heard a car engine roar behind me, the sound of tires screeching as they took the turn too fast. They knew I had spotted them. The pretense was over. I gasped for air, the cold wind burning my lungs. I wasn't an athlete. I was a woman who spent her days driving a van. My legs burned. My chest felt like it was being crushed by a vice. I reached the end of the alley and burst out onto a wider street. There were people here, a few pedestrians walking quickly, heads down against the wind. I wove through them, muttering apologies I didn't mean. I glanced over my shoulder. The black sedan had stopped at the mouth of the alley. 2 doors opened. 2 men got out. They were wearing dark coats, moving with a terrifying, coordinated efficiency. They didn't run like I did. They loped, closing the distance with long, powerful strides. I turned another corner and found myself on a dead-end street. No, not a dead end, a cul-de-sac. At the end of it stood the imposing brick facade of the neighborhood library. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I was trapped. I couldn't outrun them. Not with this 30-pound anchor on my back. If they caught me with the bag, it was over. They would take it. They would kill me. Harriet's 30 years of sacrifice would be erased in seconds. I looked at the library. The lights were off. The sign on the door said, "Closed for renovation." Despair washed over me. I had run into a wall. I scanned the front of the library, desperate for a hiding spot. A bush, a trash can, they would check those instantly. Then I saw it. Embedded in the brick wall, right next to the locked glass doors, was a brushed metal slot. The words, "Book Return," were etched above it in faded black letters. I looked back down the street. The men were turning the corner. They were 50 yards away. They hadn't seen me yet, blocked by a parked delivery truck. I had 5 seconds. I ripped the backpack off my shoulders. I didn't unzip it. I didn't hesitate. I ran to the wall and shoved the top of the bag into the metal slot. It stuck. The bag was too full. The frame caught on the metal lip of the chute. Panic flared, hot and blinding. I shoved harder, grunting with the effort. "Go in," I hissed. "Go in." I heard footsteps pounding on the pavement. They were getting closer. I slammed the heel of my hand against the bottom of the bag. With a metallic scrape and a heavy thud, the backpack vanished into the darkness of the library's return bin. The metal flap clattered shut. I spun around, breathing hard, my hands empty. I leaned back against the brick wall, trying to look casual, trying to look like a woman taking a break, and not someone who had just disposed of a criminal empire's death warrant. The two men cleared the delivery truck. They saw me. They slowed down, spreading out to cut off my escape routes. And then, strolling casually behind them, hands in the pockets of a camel hair coat, came Travis. Travis looked exactly the same as he had in court, handsome, polished, with that faint, concerned furrow in his brow that used to make me feel safe. Now it made my skin crawl. He stopped 10 feet away from me. The two men flanked him, their eyes scanning my body, looking for the straps of a bag. They looked confused. "Gwen," Travis said. His voice was smooth, warm, like melted butter. "You look terrible. Have you been sleeping?" I stared at him. I wanted to scream. I wanted to scratch his face. Instead, I crossed my arms over my chest to hide the shaking. "What do you want, Travis?" "We're just worried about you," he said, taking a step closer. The men moved with him, tightening the circle. "You've been acting erratically, quitting your job, moving into that awful apartment, hanging around with disturbed people." He glanced around the empty street, then back at me. His eyes did a quick sweep of the ground behind me. "Where's your bag, Gwen?" "What bag?" I asked. "The backpack," he said, his smile tightening at the edges. "You were wearing it when you got off the bus. My associates saw you. It looked heavy. Too heavy for a casual stroll." I shrugged. I left it on the bus. "It was just dirty laundry." Travis sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. He nodded to the man on his left. The man stepped forward. He didn't ask permission. He grabbed my arm and spun me around. I cried out as he patted me down, his hands rough and invasive. He checked my pockets. He checked the waistband of my pants. He checked my jacket lining. He stepped back and looked at Travis. "She's clean." Travis frowned. The mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing the cold calculation underneath. He looked at the closed library doors. He looked at the bushes. "She didn't leave it on the bus," Travis said softly. "Search the area. It's here." The two thugs began to tear through the bushes. One of them looked under the parked delivery truck. Travis stood there, watching me, analyzing me like I was a column of figures that didn't add up. I had to get him to leave. If they stayed too long, if they looked too closely at the wall. I forced a laugh. It sounded brittle, bordering on hysterical. "This is sad, Travis," I said. I stepped away from the wall, moving into the open space of the sidewalk. "Look at you, chasing your ex-wife down alleyways with hired goons. Is this what Miller pays you for?" Travis flinched. The mention of his boss's name hit a nerve. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "Oh, come on," I said, raising my voice. "I saw a woman open her window on the second floor of the building across the street. I needed an audience. You took the house. You took the money. Now you think I have what? Your secrets?" "Gwen, keep your voice down," he hissed, glancing up at the window. "You're hallucinating, Travis," I shouted. I waved my arms. I let the exhaustion and the fear bleed out as pure, unhinged energy. "You think everyone is out to get you because you know what a snake you are. I don't have anything. I'm a delivery driver. Look at me." I turned my empty pockets inside out. "I have nothing." "You made sure of that." The woman in the window leaned out. "Is everything okay down there?" she called out. Travis looked at the woman, then at me. He hated scenes. He hated anything that couldn't be controlled in a boardroom. He put his hands up in a gesture of surrender. Okay, he said, putting on his sad, reasonable face for the witness above. "Gwen, honey, calm down. We're leaving. I just wanted to make sure you were safe. You sound manic." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "You're good, Gwen. Better than I remember. But you're not smart. I know you had the bag, and I know you didn't eat it." He signaled to his men. They stopped searching the bushes. "We'll be watching," Travis whispered. "You have to come back for it eventually, and when you do, we'll be right there." He turned and walked away, buttoning his coat. His men followed him, disappearing around the corner. I stood there shaking, watching the empty street. I had won the round, but I had lost the war. The evidence was at the bottom of a metal bin in a closed library, and the enemy knew exactly where I was. I huddled behind a green dumpster in the alley adjacent to the library, the smell of rotting garbage and wet cardboard filling my nose. My hands were empty, and that emptiness felt like an amputation. I checked my phone. 7% battery. Travis was gone, or at least he was pretending to be. But I knew better. He was sitting in that black car somewhere with a line of sight on the front door, waiting for me to make a move. He was patient. He treated this like a negotiation where the person who speaks first loses. I watched the library service entrance. For 20 minutes, nothing moved. The wind bit through my thin jacket. Then a white van pulled up to the curb. The side demanded city painting and restoration. 2 men in white overalls jumped out. They went to the back of the van and started unloading ladders and buckets. They propped the service door open with a brick. This was it. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I waited until they were both at the van, hoisting a heavy extension ladder. I moved. I didn't run. Running attracted the eye. I walked briskly, head down, keeping the dumpster between me and the street. I slipped through the gap in the fence. I stepped over the brick. I was inside. The service hallway smelled of fresh paint and dust. I pressed my back against the wall, listening. "Hey, Marco, grab the drop cloths!" A voice echoed from the main room. I waited for the heavy footsteps to fade. Then I crept forward, moving toward the double doors that led to the circulation desk. I was an intruder. I was a criminal. And I had never felt more focused in my life. The main floor of the library was a ghostly landscape. The bookshelves were draped in translucent plastic sheets that rustled in the draft from the open door. The silence was heavy, broken only by the distant sounds of the painters working in the children's section. I stayed low, crouching behind the rows of covered books. I navigated by memory toward the front desk. I found the circulation area. Behind the main counter, there was a small room where the book return chute emptied. The door was ajar. I slipped inside. It was dark, lit only by the sliver of light coming from the chute itself. In the center of the room sat a large, industrial metal bin on wheels. The bottom was spring-loaded, designed to sink as books were added. I looked over the edge. My black backpack was there, resting on top of a pile of hardcover mysteries and romance novels. It looked like the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I reached for it, but the bin was deep. My fingertips barely brushed the strap. I had to climb in. I hiked my leg over the metal rim. The bin rolled slightly, the wheels squeaking. I froze. From the main room, the painting noise stopped. "Did you hear that?" a voice asked. "Rats, probably." "This place is old." I held my breath until the scraping of sandpaper resumed. Then I lowered myself into the bin. The books shifted under my weight, unstable and slippery. I grabbed the backpack. I hugged it to my chest, feeling the hard edges of the ledgers and the lockbox inside. I had the weapon back. Now I just had to get out without being seen by the painters inside or the wolves outside. I climbed out of the bin, my boots scrabbling for purchase on the metal edge. I swung the backpack onto my shoulders. The weight was comforting now. I crept back to the circulation desk. I peered around the corner. The painters had moved. They were setting up scaffolding right in front of the service door I had entered through. My exit was blocked. I looked at the front doors. Glass. Locked. And visible from the street where Travis was waiting. I was trapped inside with the evidence. I looked around the desk, desperate. My eyes landed on a red box mounted on the wall near the break room, a white lever behind a plastic shield. Fire. If I pulled that, the fire department would come. The police would come. It would be chaos, and in chaos, there was opportunity. But it was also a crime. Falsely pulling a fire alarm was a felony. I touched the iron key in my pocket. Harriet had risked her life for 30 years. I could risk a felony charge. I walked over to the alarm. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the white lever and pulled it down hard. The sound was instantaneous and deafening, a shrieking, mechanical wail that vibrated in my teeth. Strobe lights on the ceiling began to flash, disorienting and bright. "What the hell?" one of the painters shouted. I ran. I didn't hide anymore. I sprinted toward the emergency exit at the back of the building, the one that led to the loading dock alley. The alarm masked the sound of my footsteps. I hit the crash bar on the door and burst out into the cold afternoon air. The alley was empty. I turned left, running toward the main road. I could hear sirens in the distance getting closer. Then a car door slammed. I looked up. The black sedan wasn't in front of the library. It was here, blocking the end of the alley. Travis had covered the back exit. He stepped out, his face twisted in annoyance. The noise of the alarm was spilling out of the building behind me. "Get in the car, Gwen," he shouted over the siren. "Stop this madness." I turned and ran the other way, back toward the chaos of the front entrance. I rounded the corner of the building just as a fire truck screamed to a halt in front of the library. Firefighters were jumping out, axes in hand. The painters were running out the service door, looking confused. It was a sea of movement. I dove into the crowd. I shoved past a painter who was yelling into his phone. I used the bulk of the fire truck as a shield. "There she is!" a voice roared. I glanced back. The two goons were running through the parking lot, pushing people aside. I ran into the street. Cars slammed on their brakes, horns blaring. I didn't stop. I dodged a taxi and scrambled over the median, the police station. It was 4 blocks away. I just had to keep moving. My lungs burned. The backpack slammed against my spine with every step. I ran past a coffee shop, past a dry cleaner. I heard heavy boots pounding on the pavement behind me. I can't make it, I thought. They are faster. I saw a police cruiser stopped at a red light ahead. The officer inside was looking at his computer. "Help!" I screamed. I waved my arms. "Help me!" The officer looked up. I slammed my hands onto the hood of his car. The metal was warm. "They're trying to kill me!" I shrieked. The officer opened his door, stepping out with his hand on his holster. "Ma'am, step back." Behind me, the two goons skidded to a halt. They instantly changed their posture. They stopped running. They put their hands up, looking like confused pedestrians. Travis appeared behind them, walking briskly, out of breath but composed. "Officer!" Travis called out. "Thank God. That's my wife. She's having a psychotic break. Please, you have to help her." The officer looked from me to Travis. Travis looked immaculate in his coat, his face a mask of worry. I looked like a homeless person, covered in dust from the church and grime from the library bin, screaming about conspiracies. "She's not well," Travis said, stepping closer, his voice dripping with that poisonous sympathy. "She stopped taking her medication. She stole that bag from a library. It's full of books she thinks are secret documents. Gwen, honey, give the officer the bag." I clutched the straps tighter. "No, he's lying. This is evidence. Call William Bennett." The officer looked skeptical. "Ma'am, put the bag on the ground." Travis smirked. It was a tiny, imperceptible thing. He thought he had won. He thought he could talk his way out of this because he was a man in a suit and I was a hysterical woman. I didn't put the bag down. I unzipped it. I ripped out the blue folder. I opened it to the page with the photos. "Look at it!" I screamed, shoving the folder at the officer. "Look at the pictures." The officer hesitated. He looked at the photo of the councilman shaking hands with a known felon. He looked at the column of numbers next to it. Then he looked at Travis. "What is this?" the officer asked, his brow furrowing. Travis's smile faltered. "That's just ramblings. She draws things. She's creative." The officer wasn't buying it. The photo was real. The date stamp was real. "I have more," I panted. "I have tapes. I have ledgers. I have 30 years of proof that this man and his boss are laundering money for the cartel." The officer reached for his radio. "Dispatch, I need a supervisor at my location, and get me a detective. I have a situation." Travis lunged. It was a desperate, stupid move. He tried to grab the folder. The officer tackled him. They hit the pavement hard. The two goons turned and ran, disappearing into the crowd. I stood there on the street corner, clutching my backpack, watching my ex-husband being handcuffed face down on the asphalt. The next 2 hours were a blur of fluorescent lights and bitter coffee. I was in an interview room at the precinct. I had refused to speak to anyone until William Bennett arrived. When he walked in, he looked exactly like I imagined. He was older, gray-haired, with a face carved from granite. He wore a cheap suit and walked with a cane. "You're the delivery driver?" he asked. His voice was gravel. I nodded. I pushed the backpack across the metal table. "Harriet sent me." He opened the bag. He touched the ledgers with trembling fingers. He found the envelope with his name on it. He read the letter in silence. I saw a tear track through the deep lines of his face. "She did it," he whispered. "She actually did it." He looked up at me. "You have no idea what you've done, young lady. You just toppled the biggest house of cards on the East Coast. Is she safe?" I asked. "Harriet?" Bennett nodded. "We picked her up an hour ago. She's in protective custody. She's eating a hot meal. She's asking for you." I slumped back in the chair, the adrenaline finally leaving my body. I started to cry. Not polite, quiet crying. Ugly, heaving sobs that shook my whole frame. I cried for the apartment I lost. I cried for the fear. I cried for the invisible woman on the corner who had saved my life. Bennett reached across the table and put his hand on mine. It was warm and steady. "It's over," he said. "You can stop running now." Update: 3 months later, the restaurant was small, an Italian place with checkered tablecloths and candles in Chianti bottles. It was noisy and warm and smelled of garlic and basil. I sat at a booth near the back. I looked different. My hair was cut shorter. I was wearing a dress I had bought with my first paycheck from my new job. I wasn't a counselor anymore, and I wasn't a delivery driver. I was working as an intake coordinator for a legal aid clinic. It fit. The door opened, and Harriet walked in. She looked incredible. Her hair was clean and silver, tied back in a neat bun. She wore a soft blue cardigan and dark slacks. She had gained weight, filling out the hollows in her cheeks. She walked with a cane, but her head was high. She saw me and smiled. It was a real smile, one that reached those piercing blue eyes. "Gwen," she said, sliding into the booth. "Harriet, you look beautiful." She waved her hand dismissively. "I look like a grandmother. It's terrible. I miss my scary coat. Nobody messed with me when I wore that coat. We ordered wine. We ordered lasagna. We talked about her new apartment, which the Witness Protection Program had set up. We talked about the trial. Travis was looking at 20 years. Miller was looking at life. When the bill came, Harriet snatched it before I could reach. "My treat," she said. "I promised." I didn't argue. As we walked out into the cool evening air, Harriet stopped on the sidewalk. She looked at the busy street, at the people rushing past us, heads down, phones out. "They don't see anything, do they?" she asked softly. "No," I said. "They don't." She linked her arm through mine. "But we do," she said. "We see them." I squeezed her arm. "Yes, we do." We walked down the street together, two invisible women who had set the world on fire, heading home. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.